Grant thought I was invisible. He had no idea how wrong he was. My name is Derek Miller. I'm 42 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I've spent the last 10 years working as an operations manager at Tally Global. That morning, I stood at the far end of the boardroom table, laying out the draft contracts for our $90 million acquisition deal. I had stayed late the night before, triple-checking everything, and I even caught a buried clause that seemed off. I figured I'd save the lawyers the embarrassment and mention it in the meeting. Big mistake. Grant Tally, the CEO, looked up from his coffee with that smug smirk he always wore when he was about to make someone feel small. "Derek," he said, loud enough to make everyone pause, "you're the office paper boy, not legal counsel. Stick to making copies." A few chuckles rolled through the room, sharp and controlled. The kind of laughter that's more about survival than humor. No one looked at me, not directly. Not even my own manager, who had nodded along with me just 5 minutes earlier when I brought up the clause. I tried to recover, to clarify. It's a dormant license clause, page 83. It gives an external party leverage. Grant cut me off with a raised hand. "I'm sure the legal team can handle it. You can go now." There it was. Dismissal, plain and public. I had worked at Tally Global for a decade. I'd kept my head down, stayed out of politics, and just fixed things. The things no one noticed until they went wrong. I collected the leftover printouts, feeling that heat in my face. I walked out of the room with my jaw locked tight, back straight. But inside, something boiled. 10 years of being the reliable one. The guy who could be counted on to clean up everyone else's mess without getting any credit. 10 years of watching promotions pass me by while less competent people climbed faster because they played golf with the right director. But that moment in the boardroom, that wasn't just a bad day. That was the last straw. Later, I sat at my desk in the corner of the operations floor, staring at the contract again. That clause, buried deep in the appendices, was no joke. If triggered, it allowed a third party to claim rights to certain core logistics systems before the acquisition closed. It was obscure, maybe a leftover from an old partnership. But if it was real, and I knew it was, it could derail the entire deal. I looked over at the others. They were laughing about something in Slack, probably lunch plans. Grant's assistant had already updated the company feed with a photo of the deal team from the boardroom. I wasn't in it. Invisible. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was focused. Sharp. I knew that clause. I knew exactly what it meant. They'd brushed me off like I didn't matter, but I held the one thing they hadn't noticed: leverage, and I wasn't going to waste it. That night, I stayed late under the excuse of cleaning up after the executive meeting. Most of the building emptied out by 7. By 8, the only lights left were mine and the janitor's 2 floors down. I kept my screen open to an email draft for show, in case anyone peeked in. But my real focus was the contract packet I'd printed and laid out across my desk. 89 pages. I'd been thinking about that clause all day. The wording gnawed at me like a splinter. Operational rights subject to dormant license provision per Schedule F. I remembered the phrase exactly. At the time, I'd barely gotten halfway through explaining it before Grant swatted me away like a fly. By 9 o'clock, I found it, buried in Schedule F, a dusty little section most people skip. The dormant license clause. One sentence, maybe 30 words total, but it hit me like a punch to the chest. If rights to Division 4 logistics architecture remain unclaimed by December 1st, said rights may be acquired via option C upon formal notice and a payment of $1. I sat back in my chair and stared at the page. Not a typo, not a theoretical clause. It was live, legal, still active, and I knew exactly what Division 4 meant. It was the engine behind our fulfillment systems. Without that architecture, the entire acquisition would stall. It wasn't a side note. It was the linchpin. I glanced around the empty office. My hands were shaking. They missed it. The lawyers missed it. The compliance team missed it. The guys with billable hours so high they printed them on platinum-edged invoices. They all missed it. But I didn't. It wasn't just about ego anymore. This clause could give someone, anyone who noticed, the right to legally claim critical assets before the acquisition closed. For $1. I read it again, slowly, line by line. I was right. I was completely terrifyingly right. My first instinct was to tell someone, loop in the legal team, write a memo, raise the alarm. But I stopped myself. I'd already tried that. I already knew how that story ended. They'd laugh. Ignore me again. Maybe bury it. Maybe erase the clause entirely and pretend it never existed. And maybe this time, I'd be the one they erase too. No, not this time. I opened my browser and pulled up the Secretary of State's site. I searched the clause name, the license option, the company registration record. All of it checked out. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I could file the paperwork myself. Trigger the clause. Buy the rights for $1. Not as Derek the employee, as Derek the private citizen. It hit me like a slow burn in my chest. If I played this right, Grant's empire would crumble before he even knew what hit him. They thought I was invisible. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I printed the paperwork before the sun was even up. It was raining when I stepped out of my apartment. Cold, miserable weather that fit the knot in my stomach. I didn't go to the office right away. Instead, I drove to a small notary public near Northgate Mall, the kind of place no one from Tally Global would ever be caught dead in. The lady behind the counter looked half asleep when I walked in. "You filing this yourself?" she asked, squinting at the form. "I am," I said, and slid $1 across the counter. Real money, not a digital transfer. I wanted it to be tangible, symbolic. I wanted to feel that dollar leave my hand. She stamped the document with a heavy thunk and passed it back without fanfare. "All set. Anything else?" I shook my head. "Nope, that'll do." By noon, it was official. As of 11:42 a.m., I was the legal holder of the dormant license tied to Tally Global's core logistics infrastructure. Division 4 was now mine, on record, for exactly $1. And thanks to a very specific window in the contract language, there was nothing Grant or his Ivy League army could do to reverse it. At least not without triggering a massive compliance review, and by then, the acquisition clock would have run out. Back at the office, I walked in like nothing had changed. Same clothes, same seat by the printer, same Derek from Ops energy I'd worn for years. No one gave me a second glance. I nodded to the receptionist, grabbed coffee from the shared pot, sat through 2 meetings like everything was normal. No one knew, and just in case they got curious, I moved copies of every signed page, timestamp, and notice of execution to a private encrypted drive. I didn't trust anyone at this point. Not Grant, not the legal team, not even the IT guy who always smiled too hard in the elevators. If they tried to erase me, I'd already made sure the paper trail would scream louder than they could spin. Then came the waiting. The first day passed without so much as a hiccup. Second day, too. I started to wonder if I'd misread it, if maybe the clause had been outdated or ceremonial, or already bypassed somehow. I told myself I was being paranoid, reckless even. Maybe I had just torched my entire career for nothing. Then came the third morning. I was in the break room pouring coffee when I heard it. A raised voice from the general counsel's office, a slammed door, then whispers, hushed, urgent. Something had gone wrong, something big. I stepped into the hallway just in time to catch a phrase from one of the execs rushing past. "Somebody filed a claim, blocked the whole damn deal." I smiled into my coffee. They were finally seeing me. By mid-morning, the panic had reached Grant's floor. Legal was in meltdown. I heard bits of it through the walls, phrases like unprecedented exposure and compliance breach. The whole acquisition was teetering, and no one could figure out why, except me. At 11:03 a.m., I got the summons. "Grant wants to see you," said Trina from executive support, her voice unusually tight. "Now." I took the elevator up without a word, clutching my notebook like it mattered. I already knew how this was going to go. Grant wasn't going to ask. He was going to try and own the room like he always did. His office was too bright, too clean. Fake modern art on the walls, everything staged like a high-end showroom. He didn't stand up when I entered, just gestured toward the chair across from him and leaned back, hands folded like we were old friends catching up. "Derek," he said, all calm charm. "Close the door." I did, slowly. He waited a beat, then looked up with that smirk I'd seen 100 times before. the one he used right before throwing someone under the bus. "Tell me," he said. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. He continued, voice smooth like he was already bored. "The license clause. We know it was filed. We don't know who did it, yet. But I think you do. And I think you know what a mistake that was." I tilted my head. "A mistake?" He smiled. "Come on, you're not stupid. You saw a gap, and you jumped through it. I'll give you credit. Hell, even the lawyers didn't catch it. But now you're standing in the middle of a multi-million-dollar deal with your name on a live grenade." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to make it go away." There it was, the pitch. I waited for the number. "I'll make you a deal," he said. "You walk away from this quietly, and I'll personally authorize a severance package, mid-six figures. We'll even make it look like a promotion if you want. Title, press release, whatever." I stared at him for a second, almost amused. "You think I did this for a payout?" He frowned, just slightly. That was the first crack in the mask. "No," I said. "I did it because you humiliated me. Because you've spent the last 10 years treating me like a name tag instead of a person. Because I warned you, right there in that boardroom, and you laughed." Grant's jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. "I'm not here to negotiate," I continued. "I don't want your money. I want the one thing you never gave me, respect. And I'm not leaving until I get it." His voice dropped an octave. "You're playing with fire." "No," I said. "I'm holding the match." I stood, turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. In his eyes, that flicker of real anger. The moment he realized I wasn't bluffing. I opened the door, walked out without a word. 10 minutes later, I was back at my desk when a new email popped into my inbox. Subject: Notice of Conduct Review. HR Inquiry. Scheduled. The counterattack had begun. The next morning, my system login was dead. I sat at my desk, tried 3 times, then got the bright red message: "Access denied. Contact IT support." I didn't bother. I already knew what it meant. Within minutes, 2 people showed up outside my cubicle, one from HR, one from legal. Neither looked me in the eye. "Derek," said the HR rep, Clara something, with that overly polite tone HR folks use when they're holding a knife behind their back. "Do you have a minute?" I stood up. "Sure," I said. "Want to do this in a conference room, or should I just hand you something now?" They blinked, confused, as I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside, a letter drafted by my attorney. It spelled out in clean, punchy language that any attempt to investigate, intimidate, or isolate me in retaliation for protected whistleblower activity would be met with swift legal escalation. The legal rep glanced at the name at the bottom, my lawyer, Daniel Kravitz, who'd spent 2 decades going after corporate retaliation cases. "Tell your team to think very carefully about what happens next," I said calmly, "because I will." They didn't say another word, just walked away with the envelope like it was radioactive. Back at my desk, people were watching me. Not directly, no one had the spine for that, but I could feel it, whispered glances over coffee mugs, half-open Slack chats with my name floating in them. To them, I wasn't Derek the ops guy anymore. I was the crazy guy who sabotaged the deal. By lunch, even my phone extension had been disconnected, but I wasn't rattled. I went straight to a little diner off 5th and Pine, sat down in the back booth, and opened my laptop. My lawyer, Kravitz, met me 10 minutes later, still in his cycling jacket. "They're nervous," he said, flipping through his copy of the contract I had filed. "I saw the updated filings this morning. They know exactly who triggered it now. They'll try to spin it. Of course, probably already drafting a statement about unforeseen legacy liabilities. But we're ahead of them." He took a sip of black coffee. "Here's what I'm thinking. If they push this investigation angle, we hit them with a preemptive injunction. File it in state court. Cite hostile workplace conduct tied to a protected action. It won't even matter if the judge grants it. The board will see the smoke." I nodded slowly. "Good. You sure you want to go all the way with this?" he asked. I didn't answer at first. I thought about all the late nights I spent fixing their supply chain systems while the execs partied in Zurich. I thought about Grant calling me paper boy in front of 10 people. I thought about every time I got passed over for promotion because someone else wore better suits. "I'm sure," I said. The next 2 days were a blur of background noise, emails I couldn't read, meetings I wasn't invited to, and Slack messages I was no longer included on. But something started to shift. People started treating me differently, not directly, but more cautiously, like they weren't sure if I was radioactive or untouchable. And then, on Friday afternoon, it happened. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mr. Miller?" the voice said. Calm, authoritative. "Yes." "This is Thomas Langston, chairman of the board. I'd like to speak with you, privately. Are you available Monday?" My stomach tightened, but not with fear. "Absolutely," I said. And just like that, the air shifted again. They thought I was crazy. Then they thought I was dangerous. Now, they were starting to wonder if maybe I was right. The elevator to the executive floor moved slower than usual that Monday morning. I stood inside, alone, clutching a black binder filled with everything they never expected me to have. Emails, memos, copies of flagged contract versions, time-stamped messages where I raised red flags and got brushed off. I wasn't just showing up for a meeting. I was walking into a reckoning. The boardroom was quiet when I arrived. Thomas Langston, the chairman, stood to greet me. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. Around the table sat 6 other board members, each with a tablet or legal pad, some already flipping through printed copies of the documents I had sent over the night before. "Derek," Langston said, motioning to the seat beside him, "we appreciate you coming." "Thanks for inviting me," I said. My voice was calm, even though my hands were sweating under the table. Langston didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the clause you executed, as well as the internal HR action and the correspondence from legal. Before we continue our internal sessions, we want to hear your side, start from the beginning." So I did. I told them how I discovered the dormant license clause buried in Schedule F, how I flagged it in the boardroom and was mocked, how the legal team never followed up, how Grant Talley dismissed it publicly and personally, how I stayed late, confirmed everything, and executed the license legally, not out of malice, but to protect the company from negligence. I didn't dramatize anything. I let the facts speak. Page by page, I walked them through the timeline, my warning, their silence, the HR retaliation, the revoked access, the whispers, the weaponized investigation. Langston took notes the entire time, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he set his pen down and said, "Thank you. Please wait outside. We'll call you back shortly." I left the room, sat in the hallway, and stared at the carpet pattern like it held the answers to the universe. I didn't pace. I didn't check my phone. I just waited. 38 minutes later, the door opened. "Mr. Miller," Langston said, "we're ready." This time, when I walked in, someone else was already seated at the far end of the table, Grant Talley. He looked pale, like someone had pulled the rug out from under his Armani loafers. I noticed for the first time how small he looked when he wasn't holding court. "Mr. Talley," Langston said, "we've reviewed the timeline Mr. Miller provided, and we've also reviewed the internal responses from your office. We have serious concerns." Grant started to speak, some blend of spin and deflection. "This entire thing has been blown out of—" Langston cut him off. "We have documented proof that Mr. Miller raised a legitimate concern which was ignored. Then he was retaliated against. HR was weaponized under your directive, correct?" Grant glanced to one of the board members as if looking for backup. None came. "We also found at least 3 legal memos marked urgent that were buried by your general counsel, all after Derek raised the issue. It appears you tried to suppress the risk rather than fix it." Grant's mouth opened, then closed. Langston leaned back in his chair. "We're placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Further review will determine next steps." That was it. No drawn-out argument, no closing statement, just cold clarity. Grant stood slowly, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at me. He walked out without saying a word. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. Langston turned to me. "We want to move forward with the acquisition. You understand the license structure better than anyone. Would you be willing to work with us to clean this up?" I blinked, stunned for half a second. Then I nodded. "Yes, absolutely." The chairman nodded back. "We'll be in touch. And, Derek, good work." I walked out of that boardroom still holding my binder. But this time, I wasn't carrying evidence. I was carrying leverage. The Monday after Grant was placed on leave, the entire office felt quieter. Not in the physical sense. Phones still rang, people still tapped on keyboards. But the tension in the air had shifted. You could feel it in the way conversations paused when I walked by, then resumed with softer voices and darting eyes. No more jokes about paper boy. No more smug glances. Grant was gone, and the silence he left behind was louder than his presence ever was. That morning, I was officially added to the acquisition task force. Richard Lyle, the interim CEO, had taken over in a hurry, and to his credit, he moved fast. He pulled me into a meeting with legal, finance, and external consultants and said, "Derek, here's your new point of contact for all operational and license-related issues. He's the reason we're not being sued right now, so let's all respect that." It was surreal. I was no longer operations support. I was a named stakeholder. They started CCing me on every critical email. Contracts were reviewed line by line, this time with me in the room. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. No one smirked. People asked me questions now. Real questions. Some of them even apologized for missing the clause. We rebuilt the agreement from the ground up, scrubbing every shadow of ambiguity. The buyer, a large logistics conglomerate, had been nervous after the filing, but calmed quickly once we showed them our cleanup plan. The clause I had triggered was now a central point of negotiation, and I was the one walking them through the fix. I remember one meeting in particular. A junior associate from the buyer's legal team looked at me and asked, "Are you outside counsel?" "No," I said. "I'm in ops." She blinked. "Oh, didn't expect that." I just smiled. By the time we got final sign-off, the deal looked nothing like the original draft. It was tighter, smarter, and fully transparent. No trapdoors, no time bombs. The legal press even ran a short feature calling it one of the cleanest renegotiations of a major acquisition in recent years. It felt good, not because of the headlines, but because for the first time in 10 years, my work mattered, visibly, permanently. But the board wasn't done with me. After the deal closed, Richard called me into his office. It was late, well past 6, and most of the building had already cleared out. He closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of his desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You did something bold," he said. "Dangerous too, but it saved our necks." "Just doing what Grant wouldn't," I said. Richard nodded. Langston and I talked. "The board wants to keep you on the risk side, permanently. We're creating a new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy. You'd report to me directly. Build a team if you want. Name your salary." I stared at him for a moment. "Why me?" He leaned forward, dead serious. "Because you saw what no one else saw, and you didn't flinch when it got ugly." I didn't say anything at first. I was still processing the shift. Just weeks ago, I was the guy laying out folders. Now I was being offered a department. I finally nodded. "I'll take it." He extended a hand. I shook it. And just like that, I stepped into the job I never even dared to imagine. Not out of ambition, but because, until now, I didn't think people like me ever got noticed. Turns out, all it took was $1 in 10 years of being underestimated. My new office isn't big. It's down the hall from Richard's, with a view of the parking structure and a crack in the window seal that hisses on windy days. The desk is real wood, though, not laminate, and there's a nameplate that reads, "Derek Miller, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy." It's not flashy, but it's mine. The first morning I moved in, I brought my own mug from home, the one with a faded NASA logo and a chip in the rim. No fancy executive set, no leather blotters or name-brand pens, just the same beat-up laptop I'd been using for 3 years, and a legal pad I bought myself. And still, when I walked in that day, people nodded. Not all of them. A few still avoided eye contact, especially the ones who had laughed when Grant called me paperboy. But most just gave me small, quiet nods, like they finally saw me, like I had earned this. I kept my head down and went to work. Rebuilding the contract archive, drafting compliance frameworks, training a new junior analyst who actually listens when I speak. It was all the same kind of work I used to do. But now, it mattered. Now, people cared. Richard stopped by a week into the new role, leaned against my doorframe with a cup of coffee and said, "You know, the board was skeptical about promoting internally. They wanted someone with a legal background, maybe from one of the big firms. "And you push back?" I asked. He smiled. I told them we already had the guy. He just didn't have the title yet. That meant more to me than I think he realized. Later that day, I caught a glimpse of an old email chain, something from months ago, back when the deal was first in motion. Grant had forwarded a memo I wrote about acquisition risk to legal with one line at the top. "Ignore this. He's not a lawyer." Well, I wasn't, but I'm still the one who saved the deal. I heard Grant took a consulting gig out west, Silicon Valley, or maybe Denver, the kind of place where guys like him always land, surrounded by people who will be impressed by his resume and never ask what happened at Tally Global. That used to bother me, the thought that he could fail upward while I had to fight just to be heard. But now I don't care, because this win wasn't about beating him. It was about becoming someone who doesn't get brushed aside, someone who doesn't wait for recognition, who earns it, claims it, and keeps showing up long after everyone else has left the room. I sat in my office that afternoon, watching the rain blur the view through the glass. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible, and that was enough.